Welcome back to Data Center Revolution. Welcome to my guest, Emmet, for showing up. Emmet, do me a favor. Introduce yourself to people, and then we'll dovetail that how we met and why we're here today. But for anybody that's listening, thank you for joining the Data Center Revolution. Please like or subscribe or share with your friends. The podcast was created for three reasons. One, either to entertain people, to inspire them, or to educate. And you and I are going to talk about some power, right? So there's a lot of misconceptions in the industry. I think they're primarily focused on a couple main themes: the usage of energy, the impact on the environment, specifically driven by the usage of water, and probably job creations. I think some people are still worried about a bubble, perhaps, or a market correction that's pending. So I think what we do is let's zoom out on some of those things. And
totally.
And thank you for flying in from Chicago to sit down with me to unpackage some complicated stuff. But Emmet, please do me a favor. Introduce yourself to any of the listeners, and then let's do some deep diving. You cool?
Yeah, I'm for it. First of all, thank you for having me. Really stoked to be here and to be in Austin. Love Texas, nation's energy capital. So I'm a huge fan.
Nice.
Always happy when I can get down here. So yeah, my name is Emmet Penney. I'm a senior fellow at the Foundation for American Innovation, and I focus on energy and infrastructure there. So I'm part of the whole energy team. We have a bunch of other verticals. We can get into that later, but FAI, just so people know, was founded on a somewhat of a bet or a prediction about 10 years ago that the Bay Area and DC, the Valley and the Hill, were going to collide in surprising ways that neither was ready for. So they were going to need people to do two-way translation to harness the best ideas and execute on the best policies. And so we were very early on that. I joined about a year ago. I got brought in to work on nuclear policy specifically, but, my expertise, if you would call it, is all self-taught. I am, but to be honest, a humble word cell in the world of shape rotators. I have 2 liberal arts degrees, and I stumbled into energy and this stuff almost on accident, just moving through life and looking for what was powerful and interesting. I started off working for a very pro-nuclear, one of the only pro-nuclear environmental think tanks, and that was one of its main focuses. I worked for a guy named Michael Schellenberger, and I helped him on 2 of his books. One was called Apocalypse Never, Why Climate Alarmism Hurts Us All, and the other one was called San Francisco, How Progressives Ruin Cities. So once I finished up with that, I was like, well, the main thing that I ended up caring about coming out on the other side of that was learning all the stuff I learned about energy. And I was like, I want to get to the bottom of some of that stuff. Like, why is it hard to build nuclear? What's wrong with the grid? What's going on? So I ended up launching a daily power industry facing newsletter called Grid Brief, and I was editor-in-chief there for about 2.5 years. We started, a week or 2 before the Ukraine war broke out, which was an intense period of learning for me. Like, I knew a little bit about the grid, so I could talk about it nationally, but then it was incumbent on me to figure out what was going on globally so that I could be useful to my readers. And at one point on that project, I was writing maybe 5,000 words a week, 5 to 7, in addition to publishing in a bunch of other places on utility history, nuclear industry history, all of this stuff. Basically, I was like, I can't be the math guy, can't be the engineering guy, but with my humanities background, I can be the history guy. So I'm going to read like every history of the grid I possibly can. And I'm going to try to get to the bottom of this so that I can explain it to people who wouldn't otherwise care or get into this. And that made me attractive to FAI, and they wanted to incorporate nuclear into their energy book, and I was really, really happy to join. Last year we were very, very successful. So,
yeah, and nuclear is such an interesting topic. I'm sure. What was your first discovery when you were trying to scratch the paint on nuclear?
Oh man, I'll tell you. So I was I was working at a bookstore in Santa Fe after grad school. And I was broke. I was so broke that I had dropped my phone walking to the gym and it shattered and I didn't have the money to replace it. I had no phone. And I'm at the bookstore and I was doing a bunch of freelance writing. I wrote an essay that guy, Michael Schellenberger, really liked. And I get this direct message on Twitter. And he was like, hey, what are you doing right now? I loved your piece. I'd love to talk to you.
Was he on Rogan?
Yeah.
I think I saw his sickos.
Yeah, he's been on there a few times.
Yeah.
And I was like, I lied immediately because I looked at how many followers he had, and I was just like, I don't know what this guy wants, but like somebody's noticed me who seems to be important. And so I just said, nothing. And he was like, well, what's your phone number? And I just gave him the bookstore's phone number and pretended to fulfill an order from HarperCollins in the back. Yeah. I was just like, yeah, I'd like 5 copies of Moby Dick every time my boss would walk by.
Nice.
And he was like, he asked me what I cared about. I'm sure I gave him some long, goofy philosophical answer. And then he was just like, yeah, I don't care about any of that. He was like, what do you think about nuclear power?
Nice.
And I said that it's bad. And he was like, what if I told you that you were totally wrong about that? And I was like, well, I'm open to that. He was like, okay. He was like, watch my TED Talk, read these books, and then get back to me. And from there, we struck up a friendship, and I met everybody who worked at his office and things like that. And then a couple years later, I didn't really get into it until I called him and I was like, hey man, the company I was working for just folded basically. Remember when you wanted to hire me way back when? And he was like, yeah, actually I do. I'd love to hire you. Let's do it. And that's when I got the opportunity to meet people who are my dear friends and colleagues now, like Mark Nelson, who's chief of staff over at the nuclear company, and my friend Maddie Hilly, who's my neighbor and also heads up the consulting firm Radiant Energy Group. And that's when I started to drill down. And the more I learned about it, the more impressive it became. Like I remember this was when I was still in my climate hawk era. Like that's what I really cared about my whole life, since I'd watched Gore's An Inconvenient Truth in high school. That was screened for us. I was just like, well, it's all wind and solar. And the only reason we don't do that is because fossil fuel companies are evil and greedy. And I remember being at the office, Michael's office, the Environmental Progress Office, and the team showing me these graphs they'd made on what historical decarbonization looks like in a grid. In other words, like what happens when you build certain energy sources to the carbon intensity of the grid. And I was looking at it and it was like, okay, if you build a bunch of renewables, it's almost flat because they just get compensated by gas capacity. Right. And then if you build a bunch of hydro, it goes down. And then if you're France in the 60s and 70s, it just looks like the carbon intensity takes a huge nosedive because they crank out all of these enormous reactors in that period. And I was like, oh, everything everyone's been telling me is wrong.
About nuclear.
Yeah. And that's when that's when you start to learn about the real stories behind Fukushima or 3 Mile Island, all these things that seem scary. Even Chernobyl seem less scary the more you learn about them and the more you compare them to what happens in other industries. I mean, building is dangerous. It can be dangerous financially and it can be dangerous for your health in any industry. Risk is a part of life, and I think I really credit learning about nuclear with, I'd say, teaching me how to be less ideological and more reasonable.
Nice. Well, that's pretty deep. That is philosophical, huh? So it sounds like whoever scratched the paint with you actually got you to look. I think sometimes we run through the dark spaces with a flashlight and try to make sure that we check for danger. Every now and then we got to just stop, open the door and turn the lights on and really do a deep dive inspection on things. This podcast will obviously, I didn't ask you here to inspire people or to entertain them, but I do think there are a lot of people in this industry that are caught. 80% of our industry is small businesses in the ecosystem, and many of them are just trying to understand what the adoption rate of emerging technology driven by the surge in demand for AI and what that impact is on them, their careers, their jobs, their companies, and their ability to succeed. I think the more they understand the energy component of what we're doing, the better. Right. And I came from the submarine community, so I've been exposed to some of the things on nuclear. I watched, like Nuclear Now. Did you ever watch that show, Nuclear Now?
Yeah.
You don't have to be an Oliver Stone fan to find value in the empirical information and facts that were dropped in that.
Sure.
I can't promote that movie enough to people that want to get educated. I think that's the paradigm shift for a lot of people when they sit down and do what I had to do. I had to watch it twice, right? But it talks about if people understood how much risk of death comes from nuclear versus fossil fuels, as you said, or coal, right? So there's
even radioactivity, right? Coal plants are intensively radioactive in a way that the public gets way more exposure to.
So you wrote a piece, how long ago was that where we connected?
God, I think a month ago.
Okay.
This year's going fast. This was in the Free Press.
Okay. In the Free Press, you wrote, and you basically said, data centers aren't evil.
Yeah, they're not the villain.
And nuclear is the solution.
Yeah, nuclear is one of the solutions. I think pointed out, I think part of what's missing, there's a lot missing in the data center conversation because it's a new conversation we're having, right? So even people like you who are inside or people like me who are somewhat knowledgeable but outside don't even have all the pieces yet. This is emergent, right? So we're all learning together. But one of the things that I thought was really missing from the discussion of data center demand or whatever was what I've been covering for the last few years, which is, look, before this data center boom happened, power demand in America was like flat to declining.
So let's talk about what that meant.
Yeah.
It wasn't that the usage of energy was going down. Mm-hmm. We were getting more efficient and optimizing the way that we used it, which is why it looked flat, right?
Yeah, so some of that, I would also say that some of it might be that some more businesses might have been leaving the shores, major power consumers. I mean, I don't know. I haven't looked at all the
manufacturing wise. Outsourced. Yeah,
totally. And I looked at that and I said, this is a huge problem, because we have incentivized our power markets and all of that, right, to plan for a flat demand world. And so we're over investing in things like wind and solar because we've subsidized them in a lot of places. Texas has been refuge from this. Yeah. We've subsidized them, which has distorted the prices, which basically means it tells people the wrong signal about what to build and why.
Right. Because it shows like we don't have demand to support what you'd put online. But the reality is we have that demand.
Exactly. And I said, look, and I've been saying this for years, if anything increases demand, none of our institutions, nothing that we have is going to be ready for that.
Right.
We're going to be stumbling off the blocks as soon as it happens. So when people are freaking out about prices, first of all, they're not looking at where the data centers are getting built. There seems to be a strong correlation between increased data center demand and lower prices. And
interesting.
That's because, demand incentivizes investments in supply.
There it is.
When you invest in supply, you make it cheaper, which drives down rates for everybody else. That's the story of American electrification over the 20th century. But if you live in a place that has a lot of green mandates, that has a lot of rooftop solar mandates, which are basically upward wealth transfers to homeowners, if you have all that stuff, you're seeing flat demand, and it turns out decay and or stasis is expensive. Growth isn't.
Interesting.
That's what's happening, is that people are, and there's also just the background inflation that we've been seeing since COVID. That's touching everything. Nothing's immune from that. But data centers, big tech, these frontier labs, guys like Sam Altman who need to stop being put in front of microphones, they're a big target, and it seems intuitive to people, right? This big thing is coming, and it's taking all of the supply. And that's making me pay more, but that's not really the dynamic that's happening.
So listen, we're talking to Emmet Penney. Penney is spent the last, several years, but specifically in the last two, really dialing in on data centers and energy demands because of that, right? And you've written a lot of different pieces over the course of time, and unpackaged the one that you did for the Free Enterprise or
Free Press. Yeah, happy to. So I think it's a pretty simple argument, which is
and real quick to interrupt you, Emmet, it's you and I kind of had a brief conversation, right, where I'm like, these types of conversations that are happening where you're a think tank, you come from a think tank who was designed 10 years ago to connect the demand and needs, the future needs of Silicon Valley to Capitol Hill. And you have an office in DC and one in Silicon Valley, and you operate out of Chicago. And your guys' job is to try to make sure that those people that are writing policy are aware of the demands of technology as it evolves. Is that right?
Yeah, and how the world is changing. Right. So we have a defense desk at FAI, and you better believe that drone warfare is like top of mind over there and what that new landscape looks like. I think one of the general theories is that a lot of incumbent civil society organizations and think tanks aren't fit for purpose, and that they have become lazy or stuck in their ways or something like that. And there needs to be an injection of new thinking, especially as this world changes. There needs to be people who are willing to say yes to all of the changes that are happening right now.
So you're going to get a lot of pushback from even some of our listeners, right? Because I'm taking it right now. I'm pushing all the same messaging that you're doing. And the reason why you and I are having this conversation is you represent a think tank that is focused on connecting Silicon Valley's demands with the policymakers in DC. You're on the outside looking in almost. Not to trivialize the visibility that you have. No. I feel like groups like us are on the inside looking out.
Totally.
And these conversations are good examples of which other conversations that the listeners should be having, or those that are listening should be having with us, on trying to connect the gap between the outside looking in and the inside looking out. And there's a reality that needs to be synced up. Do you agree?
Yes, absolutely.
And just getting into the unique demands of energy, what were you discovering? Because in the last 2 years, we went from 50 megawatt data center was big to 100 megawatts. Now we don't do AI for less than 200 megawatts. And most of the AI factories that we're building right now come with a G, right? And I think that has been able to, the linear trending based on the current adoption rate of technology has made the future look untenable from the current energy solutions we provide.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yeah, totally.
So how do we get people, the chorus sings louder than the soloist, how do we educate those people that are listening to go carry on your message, to challenge back to the people that were once just like you?
Totally.
So how do we convert these people?
Yeah.
How do we educate them?
So I'll say this. I think what I've learned is that there are certainly people who can't be converted. But one of the things I would invite people to do, this is what was, and I'm trying to talk about my own experience here, right? So I'm going to talk about what was helpful for me. So I don't necessarily know what's going to be helpful for somebody else's intellectual makeup or something like that. But I'll say this. I just want to use one little example here to say, like, what are we talking about when we talk about this problem? Right? Because when we say something's a problem and there are all these negative or difficult signals around it, suddenly it becomes opaque. There's like a fog of war around it, and it becomes hard to sort through what's actually going on. So rather than saying, let's just take this out of it, I'm not asking anybody to like the tech oligarchs. I'm not asking anybody to like AI slop and say that it's the best way to go. I'm not even asking anybody to say, forget everything that you thought about climate change, right? I'm going to say, what does it mean? What does it mean for us to steward our industrial commons, the grid, and where we need that, no matter what you want?
It's a national security.
Yeah, we need that. Where is a dislocation happening that is causing these problems that isn't necessarily someone's quote unquote fault, right? And here's a great example. How long, you tell me. I'll ask you this question. Just ballpark it for me. To stand up one of these big data centers, AI factories, how long does that take? Well,
100 megawatt click will probably take 6 to 9 months.
6 to 9 months? Okay. It might take you 5 years to connect to the grid in some places.
Yeah. The interconnection requests in the state of Texas are in the thousands right now.
Yeah, it's wild. Somebody has to sort through all that.
Yeah.
It's difficult. Again, all of these markets were built, right? So Texas is a power market. That basically means, if anybody's like, well, you've seen power market, what does that mean? Just think of it as like a normal commodities market. There's the day ahead price, there's the real time price. You're basically taking bets on either side of who's going to need what, and that's how, you satisfy supply and demand, right? So we'll just keep it basic like that. These institutions were created, and Texas is doing really well here, I should add, in an era where demand growth was like almost nothing. So they don't have the institutional memory to figure out how to puzzle out a ton of interconnection requests.
Yeah.
So Texas might be doing well, but it's still overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Take a look at PJM. So PJM is like 13 states plus DC, right? There's this is Secretary Wright, Donald Trump, Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania have all made statements. They're very upset with the way prices are going in PJM and stuff like that right now. And it is in part because of these dislocations. In other words, there are just very simple problems to solve. And I don't mean simple as in easy, right? Like fixing an interconnection queue, fixing any institution is difficult. So let's take all the other stuff, how we feel about AI or whatever. We are looking at a situation where we have made it difficult, for us to build things that matter for the future.
Right.
Just top line. And I think no matter who you are, you should be concerned about that.
Well, I think that the biggest concern that we have in the cloud war or the race of AI is between us and China. And, China is really getting a head start. We have a 5-year head start over them on AI, let's say. Some will argue 3, some will say 5. But what's hurting us is energy, right? And what China has done in the last 4 years is commissioned 10 nuclear reactors every year.
That's right, yeah.
But the last 2 years, I believe they've commissioned 11. But they will still build 100 coal power plants a year just to support the demand for manufacturing and AI.
And there's actually a symbiotic relationship between their solar fleet and their coal fleet.
What is it?
My understanding is that I was reading about this last year. I don't know if this has changed. I mean, infrastructure doesn't change that quickly. So I imagine this still holds to some degree. But the high voltage lines that carry the solar power also carry the coal power.
Interesting.
So they work well together, right? Because they're carried on the same infrastructure. It's the economies of scale of distributing that power everywhere.
So they've thought long-term on power there, right?
Yes.
Where, just to put into perspective to anybody that's listening, how long has it been since we've commissioned a nuclear reactor in the United States?
The last ones that we finished up were the AP1000s at Vogtle in Georgia, which went, I think, 7 years over time and several billion over budget. Those 2 reactors clocked out at $35 billion total.
And how long ago was that?
We commissioned that late 2000s, early 2010, something like that. Yeah.
And what were their sizes?
They're gigawatt scale.
Okay. And how many were there?
There were just 2.
Okay, so they're building a couple gigs of that.
And by the way, some of the ones China is building are scale ups of our AP1000.
So they're taking our designs and then
the Cat 1400. Yeah.
Interesting. So how do you see them? Okay, so I think that I read a few different reports that said that some of the NIMBY protests that have come from 3 different groups. Those that are uninformed, are misinformed, and are either fighting us based on outdated information or just a lack of general knowledge. And those people, I'm not trivializing their concerns, and their concerns are super valid. They should demand a lot more transparency from the developers that come to the markets to build data centers. So that's a fair group, and that's the group that we need to fight against. They're the ones that in 2023 shut down 2 programs, and in 2024 shut down 4, maybe 5. But last year we lost 25 programs to NIMBY protests. Yeah. And as we continue to attack China's sources of oil, like Venezuela and Iran, that's our way of slowing them down on the energy front, because AI just means large demands of energy. But it's reported that it's possible that China has been helping organize and promote some of the NIMBY protests that have been taking place in these communities. And the people that are involved with it don't even know who's pulling the strings and who's helping support this. So we're going to continue to see things develop here that are going to be outside of organic control. And so we're going to be battling a lot of different fronts here on how we could promote this industry, because right now we're losing. Right. And why don't you help some of the people that are listening understand, like, what does it take to get nuclear adopted into this space, and what is the risk if we don't? Right. Okay. So let's talk about why Vogtle 3 and 4 were so expensive, right? We'll start there with the things that we just built, which were the first reactors we'd built in like half a century, right? Like, I mean, we finished Watts Bar out in the TVA area, but we finished that up. That wasn't like a full new reactor that we were deploying. So a few things. The design wasn't totally finished. They overestimated how finished they were. So that's going to lead to problems, right? I think at one point they started building it backwards, and because they had the blueprints wrong, and so I had to restart partway through. The other thing that you need to realize— That's what happens when you're not proficient at doing those. Well, okay. So yeah, exactly. I'm glad you brought that up, because the next thing I was going to say is, like, this is all economies of repetition and scale, right? So you got to learn by doing. So if we haven't commissioned new nuclear in half a century, that means if you are going to build one, this was true then, this is a little true now that we've built it, we've restored some of this, but you have to pay for those new supply chains. You have to put in all of that. You have to train this new workforce to do this. This is complex engineering. So when we take a look at what happens in Vogtle, everybody has sticker shock from it, right? Because it's freaky. There are a few ways to think about skinning this cat.
to deploy it. One of them is that we just need to actually build more of them. And not just those, right? We have some SMR companies that are doing exciting things, and they will be fit for purpose for different market cases. But we will continue to see, in my opinion, large reactors like the AP1000. Now, you have to create the financial conditions for that to happen, right? And luckily, there's been continuity between the Biden admin and now especially the second Trump administration, that the formerly Loans Program Office, now called the Energy Dominance Financing Office, the EDF, will provide long-term low-interest loans to help finance these plants, to get rid of some of that sticker shock so that we can deepen these supply chains and train up this workforce. And I think that will have a crucial impact on what we do for smaller reactors that are in the same light water family, that in other words, have the same sort of general reactor base as those ones, right? So that rises all boats together. But what we really need is that stability, right? That financial stability, and we need a constant demand signal. The only reason we started building nuclear at the mid-century is because we were seeing power demand grow by 5 to 10% a year for 30 years straight almost, which is wild. You could finance anything you want when you have that demand, right? So I would say that one of these things that we need, right? So we've got we need the sort of repetition, we need the financing, and then we need this other thing that's a bit of an X factor that I think, you might see, I think you mentioned at the top of our conversation a little bit, is that nobody knows how durable this demand signal is from data centers, right? So everybody is rushing to figure out how to satisfy demand, but nuclear projects are still going to take years, right, to get finished. And so do people want to pony up the capital to do it if
knowing you're not going to get a return for 7 years?
Yeah. And in the meantime, the demand signal you're responding to evaporates because there's a bubble. There's some sort of market correction on what we're doing, right? So those are all just different kinds of stability, right, that we need to get nuclear on the grid. Right. That's
so we're saying we're basically going to get the government to step in and guarantee the loans.
Guarantee the loans, right? Which does not mean like central planning, does not mean the government owns these companies. Right, because the private sector, we put on a conference last year called the Energy Imperative Summit. We had Secretary Wright there. We had a lot of people there. But one of the people that I was really interested in hearing from was the co-head of infrastructure investment for JP Morgan, a man named Fuat Savas. And I was interviewing on a panel about nuclear financing. And I was like, just to be clear, man, just break it down for me. Are you guys willing to bear the risk of deploying the next, or any of your peers, do you think are? And he was like, absolutely not. We don't know what we're paying for. We don't know how long it's going to take or how much it's going to cost. He's like, there has to be something like the Energy Dominance Financing Office to play this interim role so that we can actually build enough of these things that it becomes a predictable market. Again, stability, stability, stability.
Right.
That's what we need.
Interesting. So what do you think it's going to take to get the EDF and maybe not the JP Morgans, but the other infrastructure investment groups, the hedge funds that are out there that are pouring money into this space right now? How do we get them, and what do we get them to look at? Are they all AP1000s? Or are they? No.
I think we'll see a few things, right? I think it would be great. Like EDF right now is in conversations with Westinghouse, the Koreans, for their reactor, which is also sort of it's a sibling of the AP1000, and then with GE Hitachi for their ABWR, their advanced boiling water reactor, which has been built in Japan very, very quickly, right? So they're trying to size up all options and figure out what the best deal is for the American people, right? And to see what the utilities actually want to buy. That's how they work, right? They say, okay, so we're willing to finance this. Do we have a developer? And do we have a builder? Do we have a buyer?
Right.
And then how do we ink that deal? Right. So that's what's going on there. That's in process. Right. And then we also have the investment tax credits that are also going to make it possible, to be insulated from any sort of, potential overrun as we,
are doing the first ones through the wall here. So
yeah, exactly. We're still trying to get good at it. And then I think, we see these other things. We see the pilot program at the DOE right now. So we have a bunch of different companies that are
pitching SMRs though, right?
Yeah, those are SMRs. And I want to give them their due, right? Because I think
SMR up to 500 meg?
Depends on who you ask.
Yeah.
These are going to be test reactors that are going critical on July 4th, right? So there's some companies that have a lot of presence in the space right now, like Valor Atomics or Oklo or Allo Atomics, who I think Oklo is out here in Texas making isotopes like an hour away right now. They just got their NRC license.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then and Allo, I believe, is also working in the area right now. So Texas is becoming a little hub. But I want to bring them up because I think eventually those technologies are going to mature, but it will be easier for them to mature and be market ready beyond this test reactor, beyond when they have to get their license from the regulator, et cetera, if we have robust established supply chains by doubling down on what we're doing, right? So I see this as sort of like a 1-2 punch, like a two-phase thing.
Yeah.
It's like we double down on what we've done, we get good at it, and that actually helps us do things like innovate. And we've actually seen that happen in Russia and China, right? So they got good at building really big ones. And then they're like, okay, now we can try like boutique small ones and see what we can learn from that, right?
Yeah.
So that's the way I take a look at it.
Interesting. So one, let's talk about the challenges to make nuclear real. One is the capital markets, right?
Yeah.
We got to get money to flow into that, and you're getting the government to backstop that mitigate some of the risks to get that done.
Yeah, not backstop, but mitigate, right? Yeah.
And then you have, so there is a technological capability that has to follow the financial capability, right?
Yes.
And then there's the ability to build and own and operate it. So we need a labor force, a trained, scalable labor force. And I'm working on that. There's a schoolhouse that we're launching soon for the industry. It's kind of like the Got Milk campaign of our industry, but it's
nice.
It's called Build Now. But Build Now will be what Got Milk was for the dairy farmers. A little history there is there's a bunch of dairy farmers in the late 80s, early 90s that were trying to have their own bespoke. It's similar to reactor companies. They all have their own message and narrative right now. And they all put their money in a hat and created their own consortium, self-governed, and they went to a marketing firm and said, hey, create a campaign that'll benefit everybody. And Got Milk was created to help all the dairy farmers, and it did. I grew up, I'm a Gen X, I remember the Got Milk campaign. I'm sure you
so do I, yeah.
But that movement is what was necessary to benefit a larger group, right? That benefited them. We're going to do a Build Now movement that is to benefit every company here that's trying to standardize on labor. Every element of this ecosystem for the data center supply chain has been pressure tested to exact lead times. Like I don't know, on reactors, if you know the lead time for a reactor, we say 3 to 5 years or 5 to 7.
With 5 to 7, 5 to 10 maybe, depending.
Yep. And most of that is regulation probably. That's not the delivery of the product itself.
I would say it depends, again, because of the workforce things, right? Like we have some alumni from building Vogel that are still around and have gotten hoovered up in the nuclear startup space. But you're still going to have to bring in more people and train them up to do it, right?
So Uncle Sam right now runs a schoolhouse in South Carolina for the Navy that has 3,500 students in it at any one time. And that means all the officers are enlisted for both carriers and submarines. There's a staff of 500 instructors and teachers at that school. And the guy that used to run that entire program just joined Build Now.
Amazing.
Because we are writing curriculum for data center, construction management, project management. And, all that stuff's approved from the Department of Energy, our Department of Education, TWC, but we're going to have to get to the part where we're building a labor force that knows nuclear power, nuclear energy, how to operate it, and how to maintain it. And I'm bringing on a person that has, one of the strongest resumes in training and leading teams that have that type of skill set, and he's joining Build Now here in April. So we're going to start solving for the ecosystem will solve for the labor problem.
Totally.
We always do.
Yeah.
But, going back to what we're going to do is we have challenges on finance. We have challenging on the technology. I'm trying to bring us all the way around to okay, you've got to get a labor force. We could have all those things. We could have the money lined up. We could have the demand lined up from the tenants, and we could actually have the technology proved and validated. Nuclear energy, we discovered it almost 78 years ago. The Navy has at least 30 to 40 different types of nuclear propulsion and power systems probably, right? So, and we've done hundreds of retrofits on reactors and submarines. So the thing is we know this technology, so it's not a function of economics, it's not a function of technology, and it won't be a function of labor because we have 15 to 20,000 people get out of the military every month right now, and a percentage of those people have nuclear backgrounds. Yeah. So the reality is we're going to solve for those things. The thing that we suck at, and why I need your help the most, is if we don't get the community buy-in. Yeah. then we're going to have a ton of pushback. And there's too many people that were born and raised like I was, where everything nuclear was bad. And I think we agree that nuclear weapons are bad, but I think that we all are learning that nuclear energy is the only safe, sustainable, and scalable form of energy that has an opportunity to reduce the carbon footprint. Do you agree?
Yeah, well, and not just reduce the carbon footprint, right? Because I know there are people out there who are like, well, I don't really care about all that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking like you should think about scaling up the energy ladder, right? You should think of moving to more and more energy dense forms that you can use to improve your society, to make it stronger, to make it healthier, right? To make it more advanced. That's what nuclear
more reliable in the community.
More reliable. Look, I call nuclear reactors industrial cathedrals, right? So when they're building Notre Dame, it is generations of artisans that pass jobs down to each other to make Notre Dame possible in France, right? We take a look at a nuclear reactor. Thank God it doesn't take that long, right? We'd like it to go faster, but this is infrastructure that could last for maybe 100 years or more.
Yeah.
These are dignified jobs, important jobs, many of which can be handed down within that community, right? That will have a robust civil society, a rich tax base, right? And a lot of opportunities for people to stay there and lead good lives for generations, right? So when I say, we get a lot of what we want out of building nuclear, I look at it as this isn't necessarily just about carbon. This isn't necessarily just about economics. This is about building our civilization, right? Wholesale, like holistically building our civilization to continue.
I feel like I've always used the automobile industry as the comparison to the data center industry, but the electrification of the U.S. grid is the only thing that we can compare adopting nuclear power to our grid with, how the complexities were. So, a little history lesson, the first industrial revolution, the very first transformational infrastructure program that was rolled out during the first industrial revolution was the U.S. railway, right? And when we introduced the U.S. railways, the number one concern was, what are we going to do for energy for these factories that are having steam engines or these locomotive trains? What are we going to do with the way that we're generating power? What's the impact on the environment going to be when we put railways down that literally connected what later became the hub and spoke backbone of the U.S. internet, because we used the U.S. railway, the right-of-way system of the U.S. railway system to patch down our fiber. And that was what connected the NFL cities like the hub and spoke backbone. We got into the second transformational infrastructure program during the second industrial revolution because a lot of things happened during that time. We discovered powered flight. We discovered connectivity. We took a combustion engine and turned it into an automobile, which created that was the automobile revolution, which led us to the third transformational infrastructure program, which was the interstate highways. Every transformational infrastructure program has been predicated on energy. And what are we going to do about it? What's the impact in the environment going to be? And now as we go into the fifth industrial revolution, which is we're in now, we're talking about the fifth utility, which is cloud, right? The first was water, the second was plumbing, third was connectivity, fourth is gas. Add them all up together, you have the fifth utility, which is cloud or AI now. And in every one of those transformational infrastructure moments, we created a brand new supply chain of labor as well as a healthy ecosystem of people. So we're seeing the same patterns from every previous transformational infrastructure program, but we haven't probably faced this level of magnitude of scrutiny before, because now we're two main industries. One is the data center industry, which is emerging into the mainstream. If you have the President of the United States talking about data centers, we've hit it, right? So this is now becoming a mainstream industry, which is good for us because it means that you're going to start seeing more regulation, more governance, more oversight, more ethics. And those are the things that are necessary to make an industry mainstream. We have to adopt those because we're on a head-on collision course with one of the most established verticals of industry, which is energy. Yeah. Right. And now energy is armed to the teeth with regulations. Would you agree?
Yeah. Oh, totally. So that's a huge amount of the work that we do on the energy team, right? So last couple of years, we've put out the state permitting playbook, which
state by state or
state by state.
Oh, interesting.
Except for California, because it's too complicated.
Of course.
Sorry, guys.
They don't want data centers in California.
Yeah, they don't anyway. And when they do get them, they run them on really crappy diesel. Anyway,
that's true.
That's a story for another time. But we also focus on federal stuff like the permitting reform generally, right? So here's something that I've been thinking about. I'm just going to test this out. You tell me what you think about this, right? I'm going to start with a little history, then I'm going to do a little philosophy here, see where we end up. When I take a look at the mid-century in America, right, mid-20th century, and we look at the dawn of environmental law, right, that fundamentally changes our relationship to growth and building. Now everything is skewed towards litigation. That's a highly adversarial situation to be in, right? And some of it, like NEPA, doesn't really make any sense. For people that don't know, NEPA isn't geared toward
What is NEPA?
So the National Environmental Policy Act, right? So it's a process where it's like a look before you leap. So, hey, before you build this project, have you considered all of these things we want you to consider? Except that NEPA, if I say it just like that, people will be like, oh, it's geared toward generating better outcomes. No, it is geared toward going through that process. Let's take a data center example. Micron wants to build a data center in New York, right? They go through 300 something days of permitting, right? Environmental impact statement, NEPA review, all of that stuff, right? And then some California NGO finds 6 people in that community to sue them and say, actually, you didn't NEPA hard enough, right? You didn't, you didn't go hard enough, right? So I half jokingly say that America already has industrial policy, and it's industrial policy for lawyers. That is what we churn out. We churn out lawyers who can do these lawsuits. We don't churn out builders who can execute on these projects. That's what we're skewed toward. And I don't think it's healthy. And I'll tell you why I don't think it's healthy. And this is where I'm going to bring in the philosophy part. So the founding fathers were deep on this guy named Montesquieu, and he wrote this book called The Spirit of the Laws. And I spent some time last week sort of going through, it's a very dry and long book. I don't know how they stood to master it the way they did, but they were all smarter than me anyway, so that's not surprising. But he does have these really interesting observations about what it takes for a society to endure, and also what shapes a society, right? And the law is a huge character formation device for a society. And because it inculcates habits, right? So when I say we have industrial policy for lawyers, what I really mean is we're in a litigious society that's biased against building. I think also that creates a zero-sum mentality towards growth, where people think if so-and-so builds this, I'm getting screwed.
Right.
We see that in the data center thing. People default to that position. We've formed the habit of thinking that way. And I think that that's actually relatively new in American history. And I think that is a disservice to us. So all of these boring, annoying regulations that I've talked about, getting them fixed, getting them right, actually has high spiritual impact for America and its success. That's what this is really about. It's not so much about the laws in themselves, so that's great. We want them to be more rational. We want them to be fit for purpose. We want it so that you guys can build with high ethical standards, but in a way that is efficacious, all of that stuff. But we also want to live in a society where our default position isn't zero sum, where our default position isn't that I should be skeptical of somebody building something new and that they're trying to screw me over, right? That's what I think is really injurious about that, and that is what we're trying to fix at FAI.
Well, look, I think that has to be the number one focus, because I promise you the same types of protests and resistance that we see on AI factories and data centers today, we saw go back to the last transformational infrastructure program, the interstate highway program. We basically created 9 or 10 highways and went from east to west and north to south, covering the grid. And those programs are ongoing still to this day.
Yeah.
There's not a major construction road there's not a major highway in the United States that doesn't have improvements being made to that infrastructure. Maybe the roads are inadequate because the cars are bigger, the volume of cars are larger. But either way, we'll never stop investing into that stuff. And during the automobile NIMBY period, we had people that lived in cities that were like, I don't want a road here. I want my peace. I want privacy, and I don't want this impacting those things. A lot of those cities that were protesting those roads, they don't exist anymore because the roads went where the resistance was not as high, and there were people there that knew that if I pushed that away, that not only would all that technology or all the jobs that came with it would go away, but the opportunities to build back the middle class go away with it, right? Because a lot of the jobs that we're talking about and building right now, they don't necessarily require college degrees, right? We outsourced and gutted the middle class of the United States when we outsourced the majority of our manufacturing overseas. The most important thing to manufacture right now is a data center, and it's no longer just a building with four walls and a roof. It's the power system with it. And now you're seeing the president talk about how most of these developers are going to be forced to figure out a way to put their own energy on the grid, and it's going to be behind the meter in day one. And it has to be able to close, transition, or interconnect back to the grid for frequency response or for whatever reason. And the reality is that will reinforce the grid at some point when we do that. But these owner operators are trying to make it pencil. And they're like, look, there's only so many turbines I could get. The lead time is this. There's only so many transformers I get. The lead time is this. There's a lead time for everything in this space with the exception of labor. And what we're doing is we're trying to really get everyone that is a stakeholder back in the conversation. It has to be the people at the think tanks that are designed to connect Silicon Valley's demands with Capitol Hill. And it's us trying to reshape the message of data centers aren't bad, and you don't want to reject them because, I mean, we as a nation rejected all this technology. Those jobs will go overseas and the technology will follow it. And that doesn't help us from a national security perspective, and it doesn't create more jobs in America. So we need to get to the point where we don't have people saying no. We just have them forcing the policymakers in Capitol Hill to demand that we're making them safer, more sustainable, and we're doing them in a way that is in concert, in partnership with the communities that we build in. Like, I don't want a data center right down the street from my grocery store or next to my house, but I wouldn't mind if they put it next to the power plant that already fits the community that I live in.
You got right away there too.
So we have to go find a better place to park some of these things. And we have to get people to, one, stop saying no. And you know, like you said, we just have this mentality, the zero-sum game, like I'm against it, so I'm no matter what. And we need to bring them to the table and be like, hey, just hear us out. Let's have a conversation. Because it used to be bad. I mean, you're right. No one wants, people I don't think understand Fukushima. And they don't even understand what happened at 3 Mile. When people are like, oh, 3 Mile. I was talking to someone at South by the other day, and they're talking, I'm like, if you zoom out, it worked by the way it was designed. That's why it had a secondary security.
And no one was hurt.
Right. And no one was.
It's the best type of industrial accident you can have.
I know.
That's the problem you want.
No one got injured. The system worked the way it was designed. If there was a leakage on the primary, the secondary caught it, right? So, I mean, even in Fukushima, do you have enough knowledge on that to help people understand?
So people say, you know, a few things. So Fukushima, there's
a design problem.
Design problem, and also a siting problem. Right. Those things were sort of in concert, right? The seawalls and where they put it.
Well, and they also put them below sea level.
Exactly. You're right. Exactly. So that's sort of the problem. Tsunami comes, you know, it floods out the whole thing. It's a huge issue. The system, and everybody says, well, all these people died because of it. No. What happened was no one died from radiation exposure at Fukushima. What happened is they actually went against public safety protocol, which is they evacuated nearby areas because they were scared of a fallout situation. But that's not what you do in a fallout situation because it exposes you to fallout. So when you empty out a hospital,
you're exposing people.
Not just that you're exposing people, people are going to die if you move them out of a hospital or evacuate them or whatever. That's just going to happen.
It's going to happen.
Right? No matter what you do. So there was no fallout. There was nothing like that. They had a poor response to a frightening event that led to some deaths that then they got misattributed to the frightening event. That's the long and the short of what happens at Fukushima, right?
But it shut down a lot. Fukushima shut down.
And now Japan's starting them back up.
All right. I mean, the Nordics stopped, and then they're starting back up. France, I think, was the first. France and Germany were the first to shut down a lot of their stuff.
So France didn't shut them down. What they did was they advantaged renewable energy in their system so that every time wind and solar came on the grid, nuclear had to ramp down.
Interesting.
Which meant they had chronic underinvestment in their fleet, which a couple years ago led to some reactor vessel problems and stuff like that. You know, that of course makes it more expensive to operate. Because what you're saying is this thing that we get the most out of when we're operating it all the time now has to underperform to make way for another thing that we've subsidized that's intermittent, right? So that's really what they did. It's Germany that I think is the horror story. Right? Germany, the former industrial titan. When I was writing Grid Brief, I remember, because I knew about the Energiewende. For those that don't know, that plan was inspired by an American environmentalist, Amory Lovins, who had a huge impact on the way everybody sees energy, Al Gore, so on and so forth. Huge impact. He actually won an award from the German government for his impact on their Energiewende, which means like energy turnaround or something like that in German. And they were saying, we're going to go all renewables and shut down nuclear. Now, they did that. And East Germany was just like, yeah, whatever. Like, we have the gas connection to Russia, like Gazprom, like whatever, It's the old Russia-East German relationship, right? So they know each other. That's a different thing out there. And it was sort of like a huge mistake, because during the Ukraine war, suddenly Germany was in a position where we were like, we have to curtail greatly what we're getting from Russia. And the thing about pipeline gas is that it will always be cheaper than LNG, right? Because pipeline gas is a continuous process, and continuous processes in industrial settings tend to be cheaper. LNG is a batch process, right? So you make a whole bunch of it, you put it into those enormous pods, you freeze it, and then you send it somewhere else, and then as a batch, it gets sent into the system, right? More or less. And all the freezing, all the travel, that gets priced into it. So they shut down their nuclear plants while they were curtailing, while they were expanding their LNG imports. And wouldn't you know, they were deindustrializing the whole time they were doing that.
Raising the prices of energy.
And losing skills.
Raising CO2 output emissions.
Becoming more dependent on other nations, right? Like that's what it looks like when you screw this up. It looks really, really bad. And
if you over-rotate.
And now all these people who said in Germany, this isn't a problem, this isn't an issue, are now like, yeah, we shouldn't have done that. And it's like,
let's learn from them.
Yeah, let's learn. Well, Japan is, to their credit, right? One of the most, because by the way, Germany embarked upon the Energiewende in response to Fukushima in part.
Really?
Yeah.
But Japan still holds the lead over them now, even with regards to what happened?
Well, Japan has decided that, see, what Japan did is they played it smart. Is they didn't like completely shut down, carve into the containment dome, whatever, rip apart these plants. Is they were like, we're just going to mothball them, right? We're just going to put them on ice.
In case we need them later.
Well, they're an island nation, so they kind of have to be a little bit more prudent with their resource consumption, right? That's why, like, if you go to Japan, I've talked to friends who've been there. My wife loved visiting Tokyo and a few other places, but she was like, they are so obsessive about their trash in a way that Americans aren't, because we have so much land, whereas they don't. So it changes everything about how you see that. So they mothballed them. They're in a way better position. They're coming back to that. Look at Taiwan. Taiwan was shutting down its nuclear plants. Now it's totally reliant on LNG.
Really?
Totally reliant. The place where we make all our chips now has a power system that is reliant on seaborne imports.
Really?
Yes.
Like oil?
Like LNG.
Okay.
Right? So that's what they use to power the foundry that makes the chips that supply what makes you possible. And they've made themselves less defensible.
Interesting.
Right? So these are the mistakes that we're correcting. It's not just America that made these mistakes. There are a lot of things that happened in the nuclear industry that weren't the nuclear industry's fault or whatever. Some of it was in terms of why we're building it. But we were caught in a wild, incorrect zeitgeist about energy and the realities of it. We thought anything is possible with the grid. It's all liquid. It's like coding. You can just replace it with something else. We are now in the hard school of experience, and in the hard school of experience, the margin for error is slimmer and you pay.
How do you see this unfolding, this roadmap that gets us to where we are more like the fifth industrial revolution? I kind of look at the fifth industrial revolution like Goldilocks, right? Where the third industrial revolution was maybe a little too hot and the fourth was maybe a little too cold, and this one's supposed to be just right? If you look at it and you use AI and ask what's the purpose of the fifth industrial revolution, it'll say for humans to have a healthier and more harmonious relationship with machines and technology in their life. To do that, we have to change the minds of a lot of people.
Yes.
And it's not just data centers. I think they're scared of data centers because they don't know what they are.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to convince them that I need to reshape the way they view a data center from no longer looking at it as a building with 4 walls and a roof. And instead of looking at it as a green field of career opportunities that offer unlimited jobs that don't require college degrees. So we have to shape what a data center is in the communities, and we're not doing a good job of that. And I challenge all the industry leaders who are operating in a silo, operating in complete silence and not explaining to people what they're doing.
You got to come out. You got to come out. Here's somebody that made a small, but I think potentially major step forward on this. A delegate from West Virginia with the last name of Linville, I think. He used Claude Code to put together a dashboard for all West Virginia's counties, where you do different inputs and see what having a data center built near you will do for your community.
Interesting.
You can look at jobs created, education funded, stuff like that.
Really?
Right? Yeah. And that's, I think, the type of messaging that needs to happen. Like you're talking about, what's the demonstration of value here, right? Because there's a sort of dislocation, right? So like these people where the data center is going to be near them might not ever use anything that data center is for. They might not even like what it's used for. Right? So it's not necessarily like a power plant where they can point to it and say, oh, like that powers here to some degree,
AI can power anything.
Right, exactly. That's sort of the issue. So I think these demonstrations of these proactive demonstrations of value, like a colleague of mine, Josh Levine, shout out Josh, put me onto this story when we were visiting this quantum computing facility that's getting built by the old steelworks on the south side of Chicago. And we were talking afterwards. Great trip. Love PsiQuantum. Love you guys. And Josh and I were talking, and he was like, there's a story in New Orleans. And I'm not going to try to get too detailed because I might get it wrong, but I think the general story kind of holds, right? So this is in South New Orleans, right? Or Eastern New Orleans, something like that. One of those parts of New Orleans where you still get boiling water notifications like a couple times a month, right? So the pipes really need to be overhauled and stuff like that. And this data center says, look, we'll fund that.
Yeah.
We'll pay for that. You guys can't go to the bond market and get that fixed. New Orleans is underwater in more than one way. Yeah. So we'll fix that for you, like this, that, or the other. A combination of misinformation, disinformation, what have you, makes it so that whole area is just like, we're actually going to ban data center building for a year. And where does that data center move? Northeast Louisiana. They're just like, fine, we'll go to where it is.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I think is really tragic here, this is something that I really truly worry about, and I don't have a solution to it. I just think it's one of the problems we're trying to solve. As I think about the second and third order consequences, I imagine there's this world where locations that are more in the Sun Belt and stuff like that, or parts of the Midwest that still remember manufacturing and its trade-offs and stuff like that are willing to take this bet on the future, are going to end up outpacing the other ones. And the outpacing other ones are going to see their tax bases dry up. They're going to hit really, really hard times in the future.
Yeah, because they don't invest in this.
They don't invest in themselves. And then, it's sort of like what happens in places like Chicago or the Bay Area when you create conditions where people don't feel safe on the public transit, and then you have to spend more to maintain the public transit because you're not getting enough revenue into the public transit, for it to pay for itself, right? It's that type of downward spiral, right? Dang. And that's what I don't want to happen. I don't want there to be these amazing American cities who say no now and then look back in 5 years and wonder why they're worse off.
Yeah, I mean, we've come a long way as data centers, right? A little history for anyone that's listening. There was a time where almost every state of the union that was getting data centers put into it was racing to attract more data center development.
Yeah.
They were giving incentives to states at the state level, the county level, the city level. And they were doing things to encourage these businesses to come in. They were creating lots of jobs. A lot of them considered them short-term jobs because of the construction program. I mean, if we could build 100 megs in less than a year, then you would think, hey, in a year, that whole labor force is going to have to be remobilized. But the reality is we're building gigawatt campuses. It could take 5 years to build, 7 years to build. So we're mobilizing, but we're not leaving for years. And for every person that we leave behind to operate that facility, it's estimated that they create 6 new jobs in the community they live in, right? Between food service, first responders, educators, domestic of any kind, you name it.
Yeah.
And we went from that, where everyone wanted data centers there, to now these operators are getting shut down. These developers are getting shut down in multiple markets. And we don't want those groups that are over-rotating right now saying no, because they just don't understand that we have to fix the narrative on multiple fronts. The first one is data centers, and I'm trying to lead that one using you and your narrative and your access to what you see at the think tank level to help us battle the misconceptions of nuclear energy.
Totally. Yeah.
What are the advantages? I mean, we have the data center side, and then we have the nuclear side, which solves energy. It doesn't solve the water concerns that people have, but we're dealing with the water concerns separately, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to pick a fight with the Gulf. Agriculture uses a lot of water. Obviously, we need it.
And hey, look, saying that, in my opinion, because I referenced that in my piece, is not to say that means golf or agriculture is bad. Like that,
golf courses use a lot more water than the most.
The idea that making that comparison is for scale for people who don't know how to think about industries, which is most people now.
Yeah.
We live in a post-industrial society that is trying to figure out how to blend the world of atoms and bits now.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why they use that. So for all you golf and ag dudes, cool out, man. We're on your side.
well, I'll tell you, I always joke, I'm like, the people that complain about the water are typically like the people that drink almond milk in their coffee.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Just so people understand, use AI and ask it how many gallons of water does it take to grow one almond? And then ask yourself, how many gallons of water does it take? How many almonds does it take to make a gallon of almond milk? Right? So you could quantify exactly how much water goes into creating 1 gallon of almond milk. There's so many things that we could look at in which water is used, and data centers are the easiest target right now because they're the most misunderstood.
Yeah.
But we're going towards, zero water designs, as you know. There's a lot of groups that are getting more, and we're using non-potable water in the applications that we need. We're going to recycle water. We're going to harvest water from rain.
There's technical solutions to this stuff, and people are executing on it.
Beyond just tapping more aquifers.
Yeah.
That water positive narrative seems to be like, hey, we're going to use all the water we want, but we'll give you as much money as you need to tap some more aquifers.
Yeah.
That doesn't solve the real true concerns, I think, that people in communities
it's talking past each other for that. Yeah. But I think you were asking, what do we do about people who are scared about nuclear? And I say, firstly, I think one of the most important things that we can do is establish, and we've done a great job of this as a nation, I would say, over the last few years, is reestablishing a bipartisan consensus that's pro-nuclear. I'll give you a great example. I live in Illinois. My governor is not friends with President Donald J. Trump. Pritzker and Trump don't like each other. They totally agree about nuclear.
Isn't that crazy?
Right. So, and I'll walk you through this. So Trump is, of course, super aggressive, puts out those EOs for nuclear. He wants it. Chris Wright, totally on board. I've loved Chris Wright since his days at Liberty, big fan, very sharp in terms of energy. That wasn't surprising. In Illinois, there was a nuclear moratorium that had been there since before I was born. And Illinois, by the way, is the most nuclear state in the country.
Really?
Yes, it has the most amount of plants, the most amount of reactors compared to any other state. And they all power Chicago. Chicago keeps being we need to do renewable energy mandates or clean energy mandates. It's like, you're powered by nuclear. You're clean.
Yeah.
That, it satisfies more than your demand. Yeah. And they're all up north in the state. So people just don't know. So a few years ago, there was a half repeal that Pritzker signed on, where he was just SMRs are legal. So you can do 300 megawatt or under, but you can't do big boys. And it's that nobody's going to be excited to invest in either kind of nuclear.
Right.
The big guys because they can't, and the little guys because they're like, that's not a super strong signal that you're open for business.
Yeah.
Right? Sounds like I might get a lot of resistance there. Well, last year, as part of an energy omnibus bill he put through, complete moratorium repeal. You know, a lot of us played a small role in making that happen, but you know, he got it over the line. That's a huge deal. Now he comes out with an executive action at the top of this year, highlighting nuclear again.
Really?
And he says, I want to find sites for 2 gigawatts more of nuclear, right? So we're starting to see, and that's just like one example, right? We see Kathy Hochul in New York, who's interested in pursuing new nuclear now. You know, the state has learned painfully, like Germany, what it meant to shut down Indian Point prematurely. It's fragilized their grid, drove prices up, drove emissions up, et cetera, et cetera. And now she's looking for more. We see Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan working with the Trump administration, which is continuing what the Biden administration did, which is restarting the Palisades plant, right? So I think we're starting to see consensus on this, which is really, really important because people need permission to like things.
Interesting.
Right? People need permission structures, especially in our era where we're such a media saturated society where many people interpret their own sense of self through cultural and political allegiances. You have to create permission structures where people can sit on either sides of the table, see the same thing in a different way, but agree that the thing between them is the right thing.
Yeah.
They need that permission structure. So that's part of it. I would say people need to do generational work. This is something my friend Maddie Hilly, I brought up. She's been looking into the polling. And the narrative that it's the younger generations that are pro-nuclear isn't necessarily true.
Really? Because that's what I've seen.
Right. So it's
Gen X is the worst.
Yeah. So Gen X might be the worst. I think millennials are pretty good. Zoomers, actually, many of them, because their media diets are like TikTok.
Yeah.
No smoke. My media diet when I was young was like Facebook. So I'm in no place to judge, right? You know, but what I really mean is like the substance of the material on there. And there's not a lot of stuff about nuclear. There's plenty of stuff that's anti-nuclear. And so they're getting fed this diet. So there needs to be more advocacy work that happens here. I think people are under the impression that because we have this bipartisan consensus, you can just kind of like let the waves roll in. No. There need to be like state level organizing, information sessions, all of this stuff to try to bring people together along this. There's this soft touch that needs to happen as well. And then on the policy side, sort of where I am, you know, there's a lot of, you know, how do we make sure that the financing fits that we've built are right for purpose so that we can do this, so that way people feel comfortable. The Public Utility Commission in the state says, yes, we do want this project. Actually, we're not afraid of what it'll do to ratepayers. The utility says, yes, we feel comfortable with this investment. You know, we know it's going to create these jobs. The host community says, yes, we want these job opportunities and all of that. So that's really important. And then the other thing is the permitting silo that we've talked about. How do we get rid of this adversarial bias against building so that we can do it? I think all of these are part, you know, and if that sounds hard, remember, the noble things are difficult.
Yes.
You know?
Well, the thing that these states need to remember too is they're in competition with other states, right? So if you're a city that doesn't want a data center there, cool. There's going to be neighboring cities that do.
Yeah.
And that'll make your city it'll make it more obsolete probably, right? Less relevant. I think that we're going to see fiercer competition in certain states that are heavily focused on the ability to generate energy, because energy is data centers are going to go to where the energy's at. And the states that are embracing creating and generating more energy are going to be the ones that win the AI race. Do you agree? Yeah,
I think that's just naturally going to be true. Like even if they were pursuing more energy for other reasons, that would just end up being true because they have robust supply. You know, and I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, I think people say that because we say no to this, that means it's not going to happen.
It's like,
no, it's just going to happen somewhere else.
Right.
You know?
And the jobs will be somewhere else.
The opportunities will be somewhere else, you know? I think part of it is also that people don't really know what AI is or does or how it could help them. You know, I was probably the last person at my organization to incorporate AI into any of my work streams.
Interesting.
And that happened 2 weeks ago.
Why were you so resistant to utilizing it?
It wasn't that I was like totally resistant. I mean, in some ways it was, you know, like I had played around with ChatGPT early on, and I did what a lot of people do. We sort of price in AI at its current usefulness. You don't think this is the worst that it will ever be, right? Which is the right, which is the right perspective to have, right? It turns out. And I would say that I was,
we're in the rotary phone version of AI.
Right, exactly. I think one of the things that I also didn't like about it is that it couldn't show me where it got information. So I couldn't vet things, which as somebody who does a lot of research, that wasn't useful to me at all.
Yeah.
You know, because my name is in the byline, you know, like that. And because I'm a writer and all I've ever wanted to be is a writer, I didn't have a use for it. I still don't have a use for it to do that sort of work for me. But then I had this buddy, Nathan, who kept being like, dude, he's like, you don't understand how sick you could be. Like if you got into this, he's like, cause you do have
research,
domain expertise, and this can kind of fill in the gaps. And then you can come to other experts and vet projects more quickly. Mm-hmm. He's like, you can get to the point where you have something finished that you can show people and then learn from iterating it. And I was like, okay. And then one night I was in DC visiting our headquarters, and I was hanging out with two members of our team, Trent and Chris, and they were explaining to me what they do for designing stuff and all of that. I think I'm going to actually write something for my Substack on this in a bit. And they were explaining how they used it. And I was like, okay, now I can kind of see how to use it. You know, I at least understand it in a way. And then I got home the next day. I woke up and I got the cloud subscription, and I built like 2 dashboards that explain policy issues that are important to me in like 72 hours. And I also created a personal design system to skin them in.
Nice.
And I was like, I realized something. Like, my buddy Nathan was right. It did increase my level of output. It allowed me to do more work and get to the meaningful part of the work faster. And the meaningful part of the work is the part that connects me to other people, where I say, hey, like I've done my own vetting process for this. I've run my adversarial review skills, et cetera, et cetera. Well, what do you think of this? Can you give me feedback? And I started to realize, like, I was sending a buddy of mine who works in the graphic design space live updates of what I was doing while I was making them. And then he was just like, maybe I'll get on this, you know, and he already used Gemini Pro and Midjourney for product design and stuff like that. But he got a cloud sub, and then he like built the dashboard the same weekend, and we were just sending each other screen caps of like what we were doing and the links eventually. And then I realized, I was like, I spent a week thinking about it. I was like, what the hell just happened? I was like, what is this feeling that I have in me? It's not fear. I don't feel that at all. It's not something like, you know, hope or enthusiasm. It's like cousins with that. What is it? And, you know, if you're watching this podcast, not just listening to it, you can probably tell what type of guy I am. I found punk rock at a very early age. And I remember that it's the same feeling I felt when I aged into punk, right? So when I first found punk, it was really like, you know, I'm seeing other kids with spiky hair in town and trying to figure out how to hang out with them because they'll probably know what the good music is. And also their families are probably kind of fucked up too. So like, you know, I could find some homies there, right? Yeah, it was like really the kids from like the latchkey kids from disaffected homes, right? Yeah. Like that's where you're going. But if you hung with it for long enough, you realized it was like a way of life. It was a way of building things, a way of doing things where you said, I don't need permission to create. It clicked for me when I was listening to a recent interview with one of the founding members of the punk band Bad Religion. He said, punk itself is a refutation of the idea that you need permission to be a creator. He said, when punk came along, it said the door is open. When hardcore came along, it said there is no door. And I was like, damn, that's the experience I'm having with this. There is no door. I'm talking to other people who want to build. I'm talking to other people who are trying to iterate and get good. I'm creating this community of people who are creating things again in a way that feels exciting, a way that I haven't felt since I was like 17, you know, and forming bands and stuff like that. And I just think that like, it's still so new that a lot of people are going to have the apprehensions that I have, maybe for other reasons than what I had. Mine were very specific. You know, maybe they're worried they'll become emotionally dependent on that, which is fine. Tools are how you use them, right? So there's all sorts of hygiene to worry about here. Those are valid concerns. Don't want to dismiss that for anybody. But the opportunity here is so huge. I remember, like, I worked through that whole weekend, right? Normally when I'm working through a weekend, my wife is not happy, you know? Yeah. And once I was done with everything and had blown through all of my usage, I was just kind of vibing out. And she was like, it's been a long time since I've seen you that enthusiastic and happy.
Well, that's because this entire data center industry, the data center revolution that we're going through throughout the globe right now, and it is a data center revolution. This industry is the most punk rock industry in the world, I say right now. It is the wild, wild
Dude,
100%.
West.
And what I want people to hear when we talk about data centers isn't what they do or how they do them, but I want them to hear that there's unlimited opportunities for job creation. And even on the energy side, we're battling a lot of things from finance markets to technical capabilities. But at the end of the day, I mean, I speak on behalf of every developer. Every week I'm talking to almost every day, we talk to a developer that's going to they want to build mega data centers, AI factories, and they're shovel ready basically. They have the land, but they're years away from the energy. And they're just trying to figure out what can I put there, a turbine behind the meter, some recips behind the meter to back it up. Maybe.
What am I doing here? Yeah.
But at the end of the day, everyone's standing around the pool waiting for someone to jump in with a cannonball to get the ball rolling on nuclear.
Yeah.
And right now, you have groups that are like, I can't make it work. I can't make it pencil. And you have the government coming in saying, hey, we're going to help offset some of those risks to make it possible from a financial perspective. We're trying to figure out which of these technologies we invest into, because whatever we do, we want to kind of standardize on it. Because the thing that makes a labor force transparent, predictable, and reliable is that they get to do mainly the same things over and over again.
And improve on those things, right? Like to me, it's like not just the same things over and over again. Well, you correct me if I'm wrong. You're closer to it. Yeah. But it's also the creative process of repetition. I think we tend to put repetition and creativity in like different categories. Yeah. I think when you're building something, that's the absolute wrong dichotomy to have. The creativity comes through repetition, because then you figure out how to do things better. Iterate, like you said.
You iterate consistently.
Yes, consistently.
Right. So I think that what people are listening to right now, I mean, there are people that are going to be NIMBY listeners that are going to still not listen to a word we said. Even with your background, where you came from the other side of the fence, where you were very against it. And the more you learned about it, the more you realized, I mean, listen, if Greenpeace and the Sierra Club are both rowing in the same direction and advocating for nuclear, even the most hardline people on the other side should be stopping and saying, hey, maybe it's time to pivot. Maybe it's time to open the aperture and see this from a bigger perspective and understand it.
Totally. This week, the Natural Resources Defense Council, which tried to shut down Diablo Canyon in California and was part of getting Indian Point shut down in New York, put out a public statement in favor of restarting Duane Arnold.
Really?
Yeah. They were just
what was that pivot all about?
I think they see the writing on the wall. They were like, this is just a one-off, a bespoke thing. I was like, yeah, but this is a rhetorical crack in the dam for you guys.
Right.
Like it just makes it easier.
Daylight.
That's daylight. I think there are some people who are just coming to their senses on this. And you know what? I have been very aggressive against the NRDC because of what happened at Indian Point. I thought it was tragic what happened.
Where they're stopping energy programs?
Yeah.
That are going to benefit jobs, benefit communities.
Or killing existing nuclear plants before their time. But I will say this. I think this is important. I think as a culture, we're actually kind of bad at this. So I kind of want to say this. I, too, have changed my mind on a lot of things. If you're one of those people and you say, you know what, maybe I got this wrong, I'm going to say I welcome you with open arms. I'm not here to say I told you so and laugh in your face.
I would say take a number.
Yeah.
We all did.
We all do, man. Like, But
the more you scratch the paint, the more you see what's really available.
And also, my goals are easier if you're on my side, man.
We need one voice right now. And right now, there's a lot of people that are driving around that are like, nuclear, I know it's coming, but they don't understand how it impacts them. Listen, if you're listening, you're part of the 75 to 80% of the industry that represents the ecosystem, and you're small businesses like ours, it means jobs are slowing down. It means the projects will go away. And it means that means less Americans getting jobs, less souls that we're able to change here in the United States. Yeah. And when they have the ability to participate and contribute to something that's way bigger than themselves right now. This is an industrial revolution that we're taking place right now. This is the fifth industrial revolution. This AI factory game that's the byproduct of large data centers. It's a game changer for society. I don't think that there has been a transformational piece of infrastructure that'll have a greater impact on humanity since powered flight.
Yeah, I look at this and I'm like, this is the biggest thing that's happened in my lifetime.
100%.
You know, like it's not even close. I kind of knew that at an intellectual level, right? I especially knew that like last year, even before I started using AI, because I was at this conference in Detroit called Reindustrialize, and I sat through a presentation by the U.S. Navy and Palantir's operating systems team, and they showed like basically what they're doing for jet engines, like how they're using AI for it, and I got to see like the OS or whatever, and I was like, oh, like this is real. This is real. Here's one thing that I want to try out on you. When I take a look at what's going on with data centers, one of the things that I wonder is, I wonder if also are the people who are people like you and me, right, who are all in on this, but want to do it right, want to do it thoughtfully,
safely,
you know, and also want to communicate with the other side. We don't just want to like step on people, right? I wonder if we need to develop a certain sort of like regionalism about AI. That might sound crazy, but hear me out. I've been toying around with this idea I call the heartland synthesis, where I take a look at all of these places, bless you, all of these places that have lost industry or whatever, but still have the bones to do industrial projects.
Right. They have the generation plants for energy and the transmission lines standing there, but they just don't have a demand need for it because the manufacturing plants shut down.
Exactly. And they also have brownfield sites where things can be built. I take a look at some of what, VC firms like Drive Capital have invested in the Midwest, you know, like New Steel using AI and stuff like that. That to me, I'm like, that's a vision for the Midwest that's in its tradition of being. This heartland synthesis of atoms and bits, right? Now you might have different applications depending on where you are. I think if you're in the Bay Area, you're not going to be doing heavy industry and stuff like that. That's just not what you're going to be up to. Right. You're going to be doing it for like different other software applications, and that's great. You know, that's the path dependency there. You know, maybe some of the talking points need to be centered around different visions of the future depending on where you are, right? Like that's what I wonder about. Doesn't mean that I'm right on what to call these things or where they should be. All I'm really indicating is that the more specifically you can talk to people, the more intimate the conversation is, the more likely they are to feel heard and respected, and the more likely you are to connect with them, understand where they're coming from, and be able to collaborate. That's really what I'm pointing towards.
Well, listen, as we bring this podcast home, you know, break out your crystal ball. Based on
that's dangerous, buddy, but yeah, let's do it.
But listen, the linear trending and the access to the information that you see, you're literally connected at a think tank level that's designed to connect the demand of Silicon Valley to the policy requirements that are made or needed to be made in the Capitol Hill side. What do you see from this industry from an energy perspective? And don't look at it from just a 1 year or 3 year, but like how long until this is heading that direction? Do you think that we're going to be getting the communities we live in more comfortable with the concept of knowing that the energy they're going to get is going to be more reliable and cheaper than what they have now? It's just going to be in a form of density that they're not used to because they were born and raised believing that anything with the word nuclear in it was bad.
Yeah, I think that I think a lot of that is going to get settled one way or the other by the end of the decade.
By the end of this decade.
Yeah, that doesn't mean that new plants come on. What I'm going to say is it's going to start to become clear to people who want to build where they can build, and people who want building to happen near them to figure out what the package looks like to contract those deals, whether for nuclear and for data centers.
Are there certain markets that look like they're already better served? That, like, Texas is an incredible state for a lot of
Texas
reasons.
is incredible. I was about to say, well.
Well, so let's talk about it, right? Texas has 115 or 116 higher educational institutions.
Yeah.
It's got 15 military bases. It's got more natural resources than any other state in the union. From what I've read, it generates more wind and solar than most other states, and we have the Permian Basin.
Yeah.
So we're a unique state. What are some of the states that are more likely to be able to get these reactors?
Yeah, so I would say a few things. Like, one, take a look at the Department of Energy's recent request for information, RFI, on nuclear life cycle innovation campuses, right? Where they basically want data centers, any energy plants, particularly nuclear. I'm sure natural gas will be involved just because of realities.
Solution.
Yeah. It'll be there somewhere. And also things like waste reprocessing and stuff like that. for medical isotopes, for strontium-90 for batteries, to put lunar rovers on the moon, like stuff like that, to put stuff undersea, all of that, right? Like that's the stuff that I think is really helpful. What would be good states for that? My home state, Illinois, would be good for that because it's got Argonne National Lab there. It's got all of these waterways and railroads. It has an airport that's used to moving isotopes in and out of it, right? So any places that have these sort of path dependencies are a great place. So if you've got like a national lab, if you've got a place that's already used to handling isotopes, if you've got that type of stuff in your state, and that's not to say that that's where one of these campuses will go, right? It's about who responds to the RFI, et cetera, but that's to say that like any state that is in any way already comfortable at an infrastructure level with this type of stuff is going to have a leg up, right? Even if their permitting regime isn't as friendly as Texas's.
Yeah, because a lot of these states allow the permitting for these things to take place at a county level. You could have some states that have 50 to 100 counties, right? Yep. So the thing is looking back, are there certain states outside of Illinois and Texas?
Yeah, sure. There's plenty.
It's not a red or a blue thing.
No. Of course. You can look at, obviously Data Center Alley, like Loudoun County.
Well, but they're not going to put reactors there.
No. Well, we'll see. We'll see what Virginia wants. Maybe not in that county, but maybe in Virginia.
Yeah.
Right. The governor has been very pro-nuclear.
For Virginia or for Texas?
For Virginia, yeah.
The new governor?
The
lady that just took over.
Oh, God, she just took over. Okay, the old guy. Sorry, old news. My bad, guys. No, I don't know what her stance is on nuclear, but look, I would also say this. I'd also say, like, Tennessee, Yeah. I would say Tennessee is great. I would say there are places out west, like Utah looks like it is very interested in having cutting edge energy industries there, whether it's nuclear or geothermal or what have you. Like that's going to be good. I wouldn't even be surprised if there is some sort of turnover in places like New Mexico. Right, where they have a bunch of geothermal they're working on right now, but they've also enjoyed. New Mexico is a very poor state. I've lived there. I love New Mexico, but they have benefited greatly from the Permian boom because there's that little bit that overlaps with them, and it's put a lot of money into the state, which is good. So I think that they might be getting used to having a robust energy economy there, right? Also, they've got national labs there. Like this is what I'm talking about. Like wherever we have these outposts of high-end difficult work, I think we can continue to build upon that work.
Well, be based on population though too. I mean, like I mentioned Texas because it has San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, and Fort Worth. I think all four of those towns rank in the top 10 most populous cities in the United States. There's I saw a report that said there are 40 states in the union that have less population than Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Yeah.
So it does make sense to where, 11 out of 15 of the largest data center markets in the United States right now have experienced average increases of energy. There are 4 markets that have seen higher than above average increases in energy. But there are some reports where, like I spoke in Indiana a few weeks ago, and Indiana just issued something that in their partnership with the state of Michigan, they're lowering the price of energy for the residents of the state.
Yeah, I would also say that places like any place in the Rust Belt could be a prime candidate.
Yeah.
Well, they're hungry for growth, right? Like it is, I'm just calling it, right? This is you said crystal ball. I'm thinking a few things. And I don't think it's just energy. Let's go full spectrum.
Yeah.
I live in a city that's like totally captured by the teachers union, right? And we pay some of the most in taxes for some of the least rewards. Then you look at what's happening in the South with literacy and compare it to some of what's happening in these bigger blue cities. And the South is just crushing. It's also got a nice permitting regime. You look at some of these Rust Belt states and you see a hunger for something new because they've been struggling for so long and they want to make something happen. They want to get back to building. That's like spiritually recovering their dignity in some ways after what happened when we started offshoring and stuff like that. I think the stakes for that, identity-wise for that, like who they think they are is very, very high, right? So that's important. I think that it's going to be these places that aren't coastal that the next mid-range of the American future belongs to.
That makes more sense.
That is generally what I think. It's going to be parts of the South, it's going to be parts of the Sun Belt, and it's going to be parts of the Midwest. And that is really going to change political calculus. Like to the extent where I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing presidential primaries being reorganized on where they are on the map to contour that.
Interesting.
Right? That's what I think. I mean, I could be totally wrong on that last one, but I know there are already debates on the Democratic side about that. But I think we need to understand that this is reshaping American political economy, and states that looked like they were behind because they have everything to gain by doing this, and because they haven't, ironically walled themselves off from their own progress because they've been struggling for so long, could become ascendant nationally in a way they haven't been since you had to have layovers in the Midwest at the mid-century when you were doing air travel.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's what I think.
Interesting. So, like, I think if I were to ask you to arm any of the listeners with, the chorus is who sings louder than the soloist. And right now what we're trying to do is create an industry campaign, like an industry narrative that everyone's singing from the same sheet of music. And I'm trying my best to help arm people that are listening who are making a living and feeding their families on the growth of this industry, the data center industry. They're the ones that are going to be directly impacted by the NIMBY protests. So if you're in this industry and these programs that are being shut down haven't impacted you yet, they will. And it's us in this industry that are going to have to go out and educate our friends and our neighbors so that when 6 people show up to a NIMBY protest to argue, we can't let those 6 people shut down a program that'll benefit 600,000 people in the city. And I think that we're getting to the part over the next few quarters where we're going to harmonize that message. The industry is still trying to discover what that needs to be, right? Because there's no silver bullet for that message or that narrative, because you have multiple different stakeholders. People that are only worried about energy, only worried about environmental impact, only worried about water. Some are worried about the bubble. Some are worried about job creation. What can you share with us that this industry can add to their lexicon in terms of what the argument should be when people are trying to shut down future energy programs specifically focused around nuclear? What would be the key words or the tricky phrases that we should use as a collective in this industry to go and try to challenge those people that want to push back on evolution or push back on growth or push back on the future? Because we've seen this. The people that did the automobile had the same problem with the interstate highways. The people that electrified the grid had the same problem. And the people that did the U.S. railways had the exact same problems we have right now. What do we tell these people? So
you're going to need a Swiss Army knife, right? Because like you said, it's already factional. So people are going to have different concerns.
And it's religious to them. Some people are not moving.
And don't even
Gen Xers are the worst.
Yeah, some people don't waste your time. Like if you get the sense like that, you're just going to have a political opponent and that's life. But there are going to be other people who can be concerned on one of those touch points that you've talked about, right? So I think there are a few things that people need to do. I'm just going to start like simplest first, right? I'm going to say one thing that I would really like to see as somebody who defends this industry is I would like to see more stories from the people that build this stuff.
Yeah.
I want a human face on this. You know what I mean? I want to hear more
from them
and from the communities. I want to know what it's like for these communities, when they see infrastructure turn around because they get these things invested. Maybe there's a little bit of lag time on cause and effect there, but I think that should be in the pipeline of comms that the industry is focused on. One of the things that I learned when doing nuclear advocacy is that the people who lived near a nuclear plant loved it the most.
Interesting.
And the people,
reliability.
And the good jobs, the tax base, the good schools, all of that. And nuclear and data centers share this. They share this, right? So these are mutual, coinciding arguments you can make for what you're doing that people want to hear. The other thing is it's really important, especially if you're going to be arguing for nuclear, is just be armed with the facts. There are a lot of great resources out there. I would say, you can always follow my work. I host the Nuclear Barbarians podcast,
nice.
and run the same Substack. But there are plenty of people out there like Nick Turan, who's a nuclear engineer, who's been running the site whatisnuclear.com for years. That dude is a one-man archivist for the entire nuclear program in the United States. It seemed he's the guy. There are plenty of people out there. My homie Chris Kiefer, who runs the Decouple podcast, that always runs deep if you're a real energy head, but it's also accessible. Check out that documentary. You learn Nuclear Now.
I thought it was incredible.
Right.
It's on Apple TV.
Right, exactly. So you can dive into all of that stuff. And I would say eye-opening. And I would say this. If that sounds like more work to you, it is. But here's the deal. We are all in a position where we need to be doing more work and upskilling. I need to learn more about your industry. You need to learn more about the policy stuff that I look at. It's important to understand what's going on with permitting and stuff like that. Look, if anybody listening wants to be read into some of what's going on or something like that, I am available. You can find me on the FAI website. You know what I mean? Like, willing to talk to anybody who's trying to build to help you get things right. Like, absolutely, I'm putting my shingle out there to help this industry on many, many, many different touch points. Yeah,
and be prepared to have that type of, we're going to post some things and you're going to have plenty of haterade of people that are just going to have.
That's fine. I'm used to it.
Yep. And at the same time, like, we have to take those ones head on too. I don't ignore all those people, but like, I do push back on them. I'm like, if you're listening to this podcast while you're using AI to do your homework or anything that you do for work, shame on you for using those types of technologies, but being against data centers.
Yeah.
And if you really want to do something, then don't stop the programs. Get involved in helping us get this voice collected so that the policymakers can go demand certain things that are going to.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing that I want for, like, nuclear's vision for the future, I think, has been basically the same, which is that this is about improving society. And we can point to these metrics where it does that, right? Now, that message got lost in the mid-century, but we've recovered it now, and I think we can still capitalize on that. Let me tell you, data center folks, what's the story of the future? What's your story of the future? What are you bringing into American life? Only you can answer that question. I can't answer it for you. I can help you answer it. You want to talk, that's fine. But that's something that needs to happen, and it needs to happen yesterday.
I think the only way to get people to connect is that we have to arm them with more knowledge.
Yes, absolutely. Again, like we were saying, this mutual education across,
right?
We're
all learning. Look, for the last year and a half, I've learned more about the energy vertical than I've ever had to know in my life. Yeah. Because the data center program for us was 4 walls and a roof, and they would figure out the power and everything else. Yeah. Now it's like, okay, can you help me get the energy for it? And then, by the way, we're going to have a whole army of people that are going to be trying to shut this program down. Yeah. And we need to have a voice that's louder than theirs, right? So, if I'm trying to reshape everything and bring this back to top dead center, because this objective of this podcast was to address the technology of nuclear, the application being safe. It's been sound. It's been almost 80 years old since we've been doing this stuff, and how there's been marketing propaganda and campaigns that have limited our ability to get access. Yeah. I used to think it was simply because the people that make money on making fossil fuels haven't figured out how to make money on nuclear yet, and that's the only reason why we haven't shifted, right? The truth is it's the communities we live in are going to be the biggest threat, and it's not the financial market, because we're going to figure that out. It's not the technology's capabilities, because we're going to figure that out, and it's not the labor force for it, because the U.S. Navy already produces some of the best people around those communities, and there's other places to get those talents. My thing will be letting people get more educated and more armed on the talking points about data centers and energy. And then once that's done, we have to make these campaigns targeted and focused on the communities themselves. So I'm going to take a page out of what you just said, and I'm going to go get more people that are building these things to be on these platforms to talk about it. Ironically enough, many of them don't want to. I can't tell you how many presidents and CEOs of companies. I'm sure.
Let me tell all the people that are scared about that. Totally understand. You don't want to become a target. I get it. I'm going to tell you an inspiring story, right? So this woman, Heather Hoff, grateful to know her. She's in the nuclear advocacy space. She worked at Diablo Canyon, right? The nuclear plant in California, the last nuclear plant in California. And she worked there, but was actually skeptical of nuclear. And then she started to change her mind the more time she spent there. And then California was going to close it down. And Heather was like, this can't happen. You know, there's a very anti-nuclear group that's big in California called Mothers for Peace. So what does Heather and her friend do? They form Mothers for Nuclear.
Interesting.
Which now has chapters all over the world. She has been incredibly successful.
I think I've seen some stuff on Instagram with her.
Exactly. So, and they're not going to shut down Diablo Canyon now. And it's in part because she was willing to get in early.
Yeah.
And stake out.
Was she the lady standing there with her baby in her arm when she's having the conversation?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, like Heather rules. You know, she's really willing to hear people out. There's a lot that people can learn from her example, but she was courageous. She was courageous. And
she was willing to be a target.
Yeah. You know, and she was courageous. And, you know, I will say this, you know, Winston Churchill always said courage is the primary virtue because it allows all the other ones to happen.
Yeah.
Like that's what we need right now. All of us who are interested in building need to have heart and have courage.
I always say this industry does not lack genius or intelligence, but it does lack leadership and it does lack courage.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the exact example of what I meant, right? So listen, this has been fantastic, Emmet. There's going to be another time I'm going to ask you to maybe come back.
I'd love to come back.
Because we're going to unpackage nuclear from a national security perspective. Like we're talking right now about all these things that we want this technology for as consumers, and there's people that are backing it. But if you notice what we did with the Operation Iran, we didn't send in troops. We used technology. Mm-hmm. And technology is now, I mean, if you look at what the Department of War has done with their budget for next year, they added almost $500 billion to it. And that's going to break the fears of the circular financing that takes place in this industry right now, because now this technology is a national, it's the most advanced weapon machine in tech ever built. It's an element of national security and it's too big to fail. So this has to happen. So these people that are protesting, first, stop using technology so we don't need data centers.
Yeah.
Two is, let's talk about it. Let's figure out how we can make this relevant for you. And the only way to make AI or energy development and creation relevant for them is to tie it into the jobs that these people in these communities can have.
Absolutely. It has to matter. That's why I started using that phrase, industrial cathedrals.
I like it.
Right? So that people can understand, you know, calling the grid the industrial commons. This is something we all need. It's something we all participate in to some degree or another. I think we need an elevated understanding of that in industry and in our society writ large.
We need some of these policymakers to get involved and roll up their sleeves on this stuff right now.
I think we're seeing who's going to be a leader on that and who isn't. You know, one thing that I've learned while working in DC is you start to realize there are some politicians, all they want to do is to get reelected. Or you know, everybody wants to be reelected for the most part. That's common across all of them. But some of them just want to get to no as an answer because it makes them feel powerful.
Interesting.
And then others are willing to get to yes. We're going to learn who the real leaders are. And my sense is that it's going to look more and more like the people who get to yes, whatever side of the aisle they're on.
Sure. This is inevitable. This is coming. This is transformational infrastructure. You're not going to stop this. The people that were trying to stop the railroads, the people that were trying to stop the electrification of the grid, and the people that tried to stop the byproduct of the automobile revolution, which was the interstate highway system, all those people that protested that, they weren't able to stop it. And these people that are trying to stop this, because this is now in the government's domain, they're not going to stop it. This is all, at the end, we're doing it based on capital markets and free economy exchange. But the reality is we're also going to be building a platform for national security and defense around this technology. So this has to happen, and it needs energy. Mm-hmm. And we just have to we need our policymakers to just get common sense rules introduced to these operators who will fall right in line.
Yeah.
They'll build whatever they have to, and they'll build whatever they need to behind the meter to reinforce the grid. And if policymakers wake up one day and say, hey, if you want to build a data center, it has to be designed to this water standard, guess what happens? Everyone falls in line, just like the automobile industry did. It's an oligopoly, right? So we're going to see the same thing. It's the transformation or emergence of a mainstream industry. We're watching it in real time.
Yes, we are.
We're working amongst the Henry Fords of this generation while we do it. So this is, like you said, this is a once in a lifetime moment for our nation. And what we do best as a nation is we lead. So we don't stop. We build safer, more safe, more sustainable, more scalable, but we don't stop. So Emmet, this has been awesome. Thank you for making the time to come to Austin.
Oh man, thank you for having me. This was a blast.
And listen, if you guys have questions, you can find Emmet Penney. We're going to put his information on the podcast. If you need it, you make sure we get all of your information so people can get access to you. If you need to get access to me, and I'll get them to Emmet. But look, where can people find some of the stuff that you write right now?
Totally. Well, everything I write gets put up on the FAI website, thefai.org, but you can find me on Twitter at Nuke Barbarian, and you can also find me on Substack at Nuclear Barbarians. So.
Nice. Well, listen, this has been a real pleasure, real honor to unpackage such a complicated topic. It's an emotional topic for many people, and it's fair. It's new, and it's now being shoved down everybody's throats. So now people are going to be naturally resistant to things that are moving at them at a pace that they're not comfortable with. But we're trying to slow that pace down. We're trying to open up comms. But we have to find a way through this, not a way to stop it. So, Emmet, thank you for making the trip to Texas. Thank you for joining the Data Center Revolution, and thank you for sharing your voice.
Happy to be here, man. Thanks so much.